Hello and welcome to this AimHi Live. This is a live about science. So thanks so much for coming, everyone. And if this is your first time, then welcome. On AimHi Live, this is the live online school, and you can basically ask any question you want, and I will try to deal with them. So test me, bring it on. Let's see what I can handle. Probably not too much. But yeah, this one. So I've been running this series of lessons about like environmental science stuff, and this one is about what's the most futuristic farm. And I can see that people are already here. Izzy's here, Rebecca's here, Pangolin's here, Catherine's here, Get Out of the Freezer's here, and Miz's here. So yeah, thanks all for coming. Also, for some of you, I tried to run this on Monday, but someone was tinkering with the telephone mast near my house. I only found out afterwards, but it just didn't work. So hopefully it'll all work again now. But if you saw a bit on Monday, then you will notice that the beginning is repeated, so you might know all the answers. Enzo Catherine is saying, "Hey, could you do a series on evolution? I would love to do more on evolution. If you might have seen this as well. I did this yesterday lunchtime. I did a live that was about what can we learn from swarms of locusts. And the key takeaway. Well, I'll just switch over to this, but the key takeaway from that live that I did before was survival of the fittest doesn't necessarily mean what we think it means. When people hear survival of the fittest, often people are like, oh, that's there we go. That's survival of the fittest singular, survival of the one fittest thing. But no, survival of the fittest actually means survival of the fittest plural. And I was showing this example of this huge bacteria. There's this absolutely massive bacteria that you can see with the naked eye that's off the coast of Namibia. It's like half a millimeter. Well, actually, it's about 0.3 of a millimeter across. But still, it's pretty big for a bacteria. But I was just using that. Oh, it's getting a bit high. I was using that as an example of big bacteria. As an example of bacteria working together. So bacteria understand this, that survival of the fittest is about survival of the fittest plural. They know that they have to work together in order to survive, because they, when they're under attack, they'll all help one another out, knowing that if they help one another, they're much more likely to survive the attack. Anyway, ants, another great example of survival of the fittest plural. Ants work so much as a plural that actually we think that it makes a lot more sense to think of ants as a superorganism. What is a superorganism? Does anybody know what that means? Superorganism. Oh, I can tell we're going to get absolutely dragged into ant stuff in this lesson because ants are so interesting, but I've got so much stuff to get through. Yeah, what's a superorganism? Pangolin's saying, is it a superorganism? And 1 minute saying... talking about the bacteria fighting one another. Yeah. So bacteria, they send one another a chemical called indole. So the stronger ones release this chemical called indole, which helps the other ones to then fight off the attacks. It means that the stronger bacteria don't have to do a lot of the fighting for themselves. So I guess in that way it's a little bit selfish. But ultimately, it's like a community thing, and the community survives better. Okay, so Pangolin's saying, is superorganism something that sacrifices itself for the survival of the race? And that is a great answer. And Get Out of the Freezer's got a brilliant answer as well, with lots of different organisms that work closely together, like one big one. Yes, okay, so imagine this situation. This is a situation I think about quite a lot when I'm thinking about ants. Imagine that you've got loads and loads of humans running away from a... what are they running away? I don't know. Loads of lions that are on fire. So the humans are running away from these lions that are on fire, and they arrive at the coast, and the lions are just about to get them all. So here are the lions that are... just have one lion that can be on fire. So flaming lion coming in, loads and loads of humans. You've got hundreds of them all here, all on the bank. Now, the humans all know that if the first 50 humans sacrificed themselves to build a raft, then all the other humans could climb on top and float to safety. I know this is ridiculous, but just go with me. So if the first 50 humans sacrificed themselves, then all the others could survive. Would any of the humans sacrifice themselves to make the raft? What do you think? Get on the freezer saying, why are the lions on fire? It's just because it's especially threatening to the humans. and get out of the freezer saying they should go to the water to put the fire out. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so everyone's saying no, the humans would not all jump into the water and sacrifice themselves to save the others, because humans do operate on a relatively selfish level where they're much more concerned with what's going on with themselves, whereas ants are a superorganism, which means that if there's ever a threat along the lines of lions on fire or whatever, then some of the ants will happily sacrifice themselves for the others because they're part of one big organism. And it doesn't make sense to think of an ant as an individual. You should think of the colony as the individual. The colony is the living thing, and then the ant is just like a small part of it. It's like it's more similar to if you had to walk across hot coals. If you had to walk across hot coals, then you would sacrifice the skin cells on your feet in order that your body could survive. And ants kind of think more the same way. And that's why they are a superorganism. Chloe said, "Wow, cool. Thanks, Chloe." I think that's a cool idea, the idea of superorganisms. Anyway, I'm going to move on from that. So, because there's loads to get through. So, what are these ants doing? And if you saw the run I did on Monday, then you'll already know the answer to this. But what are these ants up to? Pangolin loves skin cells. Yeah, I like skin cells too. But sometimes you just got to let them go, you know. And ultimately, what's it my mum always says? Yeah, if you love someone, you should let them go. And if they come back to you, then it was always meant to be. And if they don't, then it never was. And I take a similar approach to skin cells. You know, I just let them go. If you got to walk across the hot coals, just let them go. And if they come back, then it was always meant to be. Okay, so Pangolin's saying they're feasting on the juicy insects. They're not feasting on the juicy insects, as in they're leaving the insects be, actually. Catherine's saying they're thriving, which is true. Oh, Adam on Jupiter's saying they're farming. Yes, so they are farming. Someone said aphids. I don't know if these are aphids. They look more like mealybugs to me, but they may be aphids. But I'm going to label them mealybugs because my recognition of these kinds of insects is not great. But anyway, we'll call them mealybugs for now. But they're farming. Someone told me once that the only living things on Earth that farm are humans and ants. And I was like, wow, that's a cool fact. And then I found out that it's not a fact. It's actually just not true because there are loads of other animals that also do farming. Does anyone know what the word factoid means? What is a factoid? Yeah, my mum is very wise, isn't she? So Pangolin's saying, is it a fact? And no, factoid is not a robot that gives you facts. No, it's like an old wives' tale. It's true. So a factoid is something that sounds like a fact but actually isn't. So a factoid is a fake fact, but people often use it to refer to a small fact, but actually a small fact would make more sense to call it something like a factet. But a factoid is something that actually isn't a fact, it just sounds like one. So a factoid would be something like the only animals that farm are ants and humans. Anyway, so these ants are farming and they're really enjoying it, and they will even go as far as taking these mealybugs and sheltering them under huge leaves when it rains. So when it rains, they'll gather them all underneath these big leaves to protect them from being swept away by the rain, which I think is pretty cool. Anyway, so I'm gonna do one more thing about ants, which I did already show last time, but just show it one more time. So ants farming mealybugs is pretty cool, but who knows the name of the biggest ants in terms of the size of the nest that they create? So there are some ants that create a ridiculously huge underground nest. What's their name? And the way that they achieve this is by farming, because it's the only way they can create enough food. And so what they do is they're like, well, there isn't that much easily available food all around us, but there's an absolute ton of leaves and grass and things like that. So what they do is they set up their nest near some trees and they cut down all the leaves off the trees, take them underground, and they can't eat the leaves, but they feed them to a fungus that eats the leaves for them, and they create Has anyone said what the name of these kind of ants is yet? Anyway, I'll show you. This is the scale of the nest that these things produce. It's unreal how big these things get. Like, they just go several meters underground and like span huge distances. Does anyone know what kind of ant's nest this is? I don't know if anyone's said it. Catherine's saying, what is the benefit of farming mealybugs? So the ants will farm the mealybugs because the mealybugs, I think they're able to feed off the tree sap and then convert it to more accessible sugars for the ants. So I think it's about improving the access of food, which ultimately is why we farm, right? It's rather than hunting and gathering, it's easier. We create easier access food by farming. And Japan Maple's just joined perfectly late from where we stopped on Monday. Yeah, so this is a huge leafcutter ant farm, which Pangolin's got spot on. And the only way that it manages to get this big is because these ants are farming. I'm just going to grab that. These ants are farming a fungus underground that can process the leaves that they're chopping down and bringing into the nest. And yeah, there's so much cool stuff about leafcutter ants, but I'm not going to show you all of that now. Right, okay, what I do want to start with is this. So, I know I already started, but I'm gonna show you guys something that I found once when I went on a trip. Also, for those joining late, thanks for coming. This is an AimHi Live, so you can ask questions whenever. And today I'm talking about what is the most futuristic farm. And we're just starting off by talking about leafcutter ants because they're bloody amazing, and look how big this nest is that they've created. Anyway, so a few years ago, I went to Norway with some friends, and we wanted to go and climb a glacier, but we were really inexperienced. So we kind of like drove to the bottom of the glacier, and it was blizzards and stuff. And everyone at the bottom of the glacier was like, no, you can't climb the glacier, you idiots. You don't have any training. The weather's ridiculous. No one in their right minds would think of going up this glacier. So ultimately we didn't climb the glacier, but we still wanted to do something. So we just wandered kind of into the wilderness around this village. And eventually we came upon this farm. And the farm was covered in snow, and there was no one around, and we just kind of wandered in. Like, we were going to go and say hello to the farmer. Like, I come from a bit of a farming family, so I know, I feel like I'm okay just like walking up to a farm. I felt comfortable doing that. And we ran into this farmer who was really friendly and wanted to show us what was going on in his farm. So he took us inside and he showed us. He was running a dairy farm, and I want to show you guys a video of what I took when I was inside the farm. So I'm going to show you this video, and I want you to tell me how you feel about this, like what kind of response you have, and then we're just going to talk about it. So here we go. I need to just pop it onto the top, so let me get rid of that. Right, here we go. Let me play it. In fact, I'll give you some sound as well. Here goes.
Oh, that robot hand is important. It grabs the milk out.
Right, let's close it off. So let me switch back to this. What do you guys think about what's going on there? And also, I just want to say, 1 million sloths, great comment about, are they called mealybugs because they feed other animals? And also, in response to Catherine, no, the ants don't eat the mealybugs. The mealybugs kind of produce like these balls of liquid sugar almost on their necks that the ants can then consume and take back to their nests. The mealybugs essentially act as like a halfway house to kind of get the sugars out of the plant and then give it to the ants in a more accessible form. Well, I'm trying to catch up on everything. Okay, so what have people said? Miz is talking about robot farmers. Chloe Summers saying it's robots. And Japan people are saying they have those at dairy farms near me. It's pretty cool. So Pangolin is saying if they aren't let out, then isn't that like cattle battery farming? Okay, so this is what I wanted to talk to you guys about. I'm just going to go down here because the picture's clearer, even though we've not got onto this bit. But yeah, if we're talking about like robot farming of cattle, then what are the pros and the cons? And I think one of the big cons is Pangolin, you're right, that it could result in a kind of battery style farming of cows, because it'll be so much easier to keep loads of them in close quarters and then they just deal with themselves, and it becomes increasingly hands off. And the more hands off it becomes, the more potentially like these cows could get themselves into terrible situations. But actually, like, that farm in itself was much better than most dairy farms that I've ever been to. The cows had a large amount of space. They were in the barn at the time because it was snowing and it was winter, but outside they had a large amount of space to enter normally. And the farmer explained that what happened was the cows often find it really uncomfortable when they need to be milked, because cows have been bred for many hundreds of years now to produce way more milk than they would naturally normally produce, right? And so I think it must be quite uncomfortable when the cows need to be milked. And ultimately, when they want to be milked, they just go into the automatic milker. They don't wait for milking time. They're just like, right, I want to be milked, and in they go. So in that way, I guess it makes things better. But ultimately, the dairy industry is fraught with loads and loads and loads of problems, as everyone will know from like watching other lives that I've done. And yeah, but anyway, let's not go into the dairy industry now, because that's for another time. Right, vertical farms. This is called a vertical farm. It's called a vertical farm because it's all vertical. Has anyone ever had any food from a vertical farm? Yeah, Japan Maple, exactly. Great point about the dairy industry. This is one of the big problems. And also saying about how it becomes easier with robot farming to separate ourselves from the suffering that animals go through. Exactly. 1 million stars is saying probably. Gareth Freezer says no, but I want to. And Catherine's saying don't think so. No, but it's probably scrumptious. Yeah, it's you probably will have had stuff from vertical farms because it's becoming increasingly popular, especially in cities. So I was touring this nuclear, well, I think it was built as like a nuclear bunker, but I was touring this old kind of nuclear bunker type thing in South London where it's called growing underground. It was something that I'd always wanted to get into to see what it was like, and then eventually the opportunity arose because the person who was running it, I got chatting to them and they were like, oh, you should come check it out. And I've made a video about it, but I've not put it out yet. But this amazing operation where they're growing all the food underground, under lights and stuff, and even though it takes quite a bit of electricity to run the lights, it actually reduces all of the lead time, because a lot of the problem with food is that all of this really fresh food, a lot of the reason why it's so damaging for the environment, I don't want to say it's like hugely damaging for the environment for vegetables, because vegetables are way better than animal products for the environment for sure. But loads of the environmental impact of vegetables is about keeping them fresh and transporting them quickly. So can you keep them fresh enough and can you transport them fast enough? So it's all about freshness and speed. Like how fresh and how speedy can you get this stuff transported? And that's why some vegetables can cause, or some like plant products can cause like air miles and can cause the use of loads of plastic packaging and stuff like that. But these vertical farms that exist already underground London and all around the world only have to travel like 10 minutes on a bike to get to the place where they're going to be sold. They don't need the same level of packaging, and this could certainly be part of a future that hugely reduces our impact on the planet, potentially, and certainly so if we find ways of getting even cheaper electricity like fusion. So I'm pretty for vertical farms and the continuing of them trying to develop, and to be honest, I'd really love to own a vertical farm one day. It's one of my big ambitions in life. So if anyone is wondering what to get me for my birthday, in brackets, it was my birthday on Monday, then a vertical farm would be it. Right, okay, so question. Does anyone know what the plant looks like that grows Brussels sprouts? So Brussels sprouts, what does the plant look like that grows them? Happy birthday for Monday, Professor Shrib. Thanks. Catherine's going to get me a vertical farm. Thank you. And okay, right, I'll show you what Brussels sprouts look like because we're running out of time. There's still quite a few things I want to get through. This is what the tree looks like that grows Brussels sprouts. How cool is that? I just remember, like, I like grew up on a bit of a farm, like not really a farm anymore, but it used to be a farm. And my mum's always been like really into growing vegetables, and so for me it was just like normal to see this kind of stuff growing in the garden. But my mum always talks about how most people don't get to see this, and so I've started like filming my mum a little bit to show, so that when she's like explaining the garden, and eventually I'll put it out to show everyone. But anyway, these are where Brussels sprouts come from, which I think is pretty cool. Mirs has never seen it in their life. Chloe Summers saying, "Wow, exactly, it's so cool, isn't it?" This is where they all come from. Anyway, so that's the Brussels sprout story. Bee sprouts. Now, let's get on to one of the other things I wanted to teach you about, which is some of the different techniques in farming that have been cropping up. So, 3 different things: hydroponics, aquaponics, aeroponics. Does anyone know what hydroponics is all about? And yeah, Pangolin, I agree. I bet they are harvested in a genius way. In fact, I really want to see that. Okay, so people are saying water instead of soil. Water, there's no soil. Exactly. So hydroponics is kind of like what you're seeing here. You dip the plant's roots down into a bath of water, and the water is filled with, so it's like a water bath, basically. The water bath is filled with all the nutrients that the plant needs, and you can constantly be replacing the water so that you can make sure it has the nutrients that it wants and get rid of the things that it doesn't want. So you cycle it round and round and round. Right, what's aquaponics? And while people are saying what they think aquaponics is, I'll just say, like, hydroponics saves loads of water. Hydroponics is such a good way to save water in growing plants, because instead of putting water into the soil where it ultimately drains away and so on, you can contain all of the water. So in areas of the world where water is quite scarce, which is becoming a problem in a lot of places. And I don't want to say that fresh water is becoming more scarce, because actually that's false, and that's one of the things that's spread around that's not true. And fresh water all around the world is actually increasing because the number of reservoirs and things like that are going up. But there are a lot of places that are struggling for fresh water, and aquifers underground running out and so on. Anyway, basically things like this are going to become really important because they do preserve water. So aquaponics, what do people think? Izzy Rose is saying you keep fish and cycle the water through the plants. The nutrients from the fish poo is used by the plants. Spot on. Aquaponics is this brilliant system where you basically are cycling the water that the plants use with a pond full of fish. Because if you think about it, that would be how it would naturally exist. You'd have a river or a pond or a lake or whatever that would have fish in it, and it would have plants in it, and they would coexist. And the plants benefit from some of the waste products given off by the fish, and vice versa. So you're basically cycling the plant water with fish water, and yeah, it's called aquaponics. Aqua, I guess, because it's more to do with like the real natural water system. But aquaponics is a cool thing, and just with a very small number of fish, you can grow a huge number of plants without having to use the kind of artificial technology of hydroponics, which, to be honest, probably isn't as good, because if there's one thing that you learn about biology as you get deeper and deeper into it, is that it's so complicated that any pretense that we can completely understand what's going on is just like not true. There's just so much going on. It goes so deep, and the more that we can use natural systems to look after ourselves, work with them, and like develop our future farming and so on, the better, because natural systems have had billions of years to develop, whereas our kind of human ideas are just not that good yet. Classic example is I've said this before, but thinking that we can, that all we need to do to get plants to grow is to give the soil fertilizers. So mad. We don't need to just give the soil fertilizer. We need to keep the soil alive, because the soil is biology, and fertilizers will kill the soil, even if they help the plants briefly. Anyway, aeroponics. What is that? What's the last one on this list? What is aeroponics? And this is one of my favorites, aeroponics. Pangolin. Pangolin's saying you need an otter in with the aquaponics system. Yeah, just chuck an otter in would be what the factory manager would say when they're given the notes to show that things aren't quite right. Chuck another otter into the aquaponics. I love otters. Okay, so yes, growing in nutritious air. So aeroponics is the most water efficient of them all. What you have is you have plant roots dangling in air, and they look so beautiful when you see them. But it's in air, normally in like a tube, and the tube has a very fine mist within it, and the mist is water, but also contains the nutrients that the plant needs. Now, this might seem quite bizarre, and it might be like, well, why don't you just use hydroponics instead of aeroponics? But aeroponics is so much more efficient than hydroponics. You can use a tiny amount of water to grow food using aeroponics, because the transfer rate of water that you put into the mist going into the roots is so high. So aeroponics is really the big answer to places that are really running out of water, if they can develop the technology to grow it, because it's so water efficient. I mean, it really is. I mean, think about how inefficient it is just like pouring water onto soil to grow a small number of plants at the top. And I always feel weird talking about inefficiency in biology, because obviously the water is then used somewhere else usefully. But still, if we want to grow food efficiently, aeroponics is a big dream. And I wonder if you can link aeroponics with aquaponics. I've never actually looked into anyone who's linking those two together, but maybe someone could check it out and find out and let me know on the chat sometime, because that would be pretty cool. Anyway, right, I'm starting to run over time, but I'm just going to quickly show you the last two things. So again, I mentioned this on another live, but this is solar foods. I was told about this a few years ago, before it was really a thing, and then I saw it in the news a few months ago. It's finally properly launched. But I met one of the guys who was working on it. It's a Finnish company, and they are using solar panels to create electricity to make food out of the air. And this is, okay, to give you some perspective, most plants do a bit somewhere between 0 and 3% of the sun's energy they capture, and they turn it into food. That's the ranking for plants. Most of them get between around 0 and 3%. Sugarcane gets something like 7 or 8%, I remember seeing, but that's incredibly high for plants. Most plants do not manage to capture that much of the sunlight that hits them. So what this means is that the sunlight hits sugarcane, let's say 100 joules of light land on the sugarcane, 8 joules of that is converted into solid part of the plant, into food. Whereas most plants, it's more like somewhere between 0 and 3%. So as you can see, like most of the sun's energy is actually lost. However, we're getting solar panels now that can start to capture above 20, 30, even 40%, let's say 30% plus of the sun's energy. And what these guys are doing is they've figured out this way of taking the electricity from the solar panels and using it to supply electrons to bacteria. And these bacteria essentially feed off the high energy electrons to turn it into food by just pulling gases out of the air. And then obviously they're growing, and so they're creating biomass or food out of themselves. And so, yeah, the bacteria are creating food out of thin air at far, far higher, like 10 times or even more efficiency than many plants, which is pretty amazing. But still, this kind of technology is the kind of thing that I'm really excited about it being developed, but at the same time, we should never look at this and be like, oh, everything's solved, we don't need to worry about the land, because we really need to convert the land back to nature, otherwise we're in big trouble. Okay, right, last thing I wanted to show you is this. This is a farm that has some good things and some bad things. What do you think is good about this farm, and what is bad about this farm? What do you think? And whilst people are saying what they think is good and bad, I'm just going to catch up on some bits of chat. So good and bad. I want to know what you think. So what are people saying? Oh, Catherine's talking about my podcasts. Yeah, do check out my podcast. I've got a load that I'm about to release, actually. It's taken ages to coordinate everyone and everything, and it's also been a lot my fault, but I've got about 8 new episodes that are about to come out. Check out my podcast, everyone. It's called... sorry, I was trying to say 2 different names simultaneously. It's called A Piece of String. Okay, so Anna Evans-Wolf is saying, what do you think the main thing limiting these farming techniques from being used more is? Well, I think it's a technological thing. Like, the thing about farming is that to set up a farm costs almost nothing. The setup cost is basically zero. You just have soil, and then you just put in some relatively inexpensive seeds. And so that's what happens all around the world. But in comparison, hydroponics, aquaponics, aeroponics are really expensive to set up, and so they're just inaccessible to a lot of people. And I think that that's a worry in some ways, because it could allow those technologies to become monopolized by big business, and then large businesses could control the food supply even more than they already do so. So there's already one company in particular called Monsanto, which is gargantuan and huge and controls so much of the food industry, which is not a good thing, in my opinion, for one organization to control so much. But yeah, I think that's the main thing that's kind of stopping people from using these technologies, is that they're inherently a bit more expensive to set up. But I think they are so cool, and I really hope that people start to develop ways, and maybe it'll be some of you guys watching now, developing ways to distribute these technologies more easily so they're accessible to people all around the world, so that people can have more food sustainability. Because even though some people might look at this and be like, ooh, I can make loads of money out of this, because I can set this up and I can produce food more efficiently than anyone else, ultimately, if we're going to build a global system that's going to be sustainable and allow us all to live on this earth for a long period of time, then we need to create a food system that doesn't require huge amounts of travel, and therefore for the food. And therefore we need to create a food system that is local and works. And to do that, we need to empower local farmers to be able to grow their own food. And a functioning, if people want to, be successful and build big organizations and things in their lives, then you need to do it in a world where people have enough food to eat, and where we're not destroying nature. So I really hope that these technologies are ones that get distributed in a way that is equitable and basically spread all around the world for everyone. Anyway, I'll finish talking about that now, and go back to what I was asking people about this farm. So what's good about this farm? What's bad? So Izzy Rose is saying a nice little bit of agroforestry, exactly. And Pangolin is saying it's good, yeah, integrated in a forest. But kind of saying maybe there's overplanting, and Japan maple is saying too much of the same plant. Okay, so these are some great points. And Anna Evans-Wolf saying not just the monoculture, slightly higher biodiversity. Exactly. So this farm is kind of moving in a better direction than a lot of farms. Most farms you see, and I find this weird that I almost feel like I've been taught to look at a farm, like a big field full of crops, and think, oh, that looks beautiful. And I've been teaching myself to think it looks ugly if it's all one plant. Because now I've been understanding and learning about the fact that all one plant, a big monoculture, is very, very bad for the soil, for the surrounding nature, for everything. And so I've started to look at a field full of the same thing and think, oh, that's actually quite disgusting. So this is a bit nicer on the eye, because even though the plants are all the same, at least they've got some trees mixed in, which will help with some of the biodiversity and help nature to thrive there a little more in amidst the farm, and also help to keep the soil healthier, so that this farm can carry on for tens or hundreds of years, rather than just thinking really short term, trying to get as much out of the soil in a few years as possible, and ultimately destroying the soil with monoculture. So I just wanted to end on this idea that what's the most futuristic farm? We've talked about some futuristic ideas like these, but ultimately the most futuristic farm in many ways might be a really old-fashioned farm. It might be a really old-fashioned farm where loads of different crops are being grown, all mixed in together, and it's done on a small scale, locally, by people who are taught well, so understand how to look after the soil and understand modern methods of farming and how to protect nature, but do it in a way that is on a community scale and distributed all across the world, so that it empowers multiple people. Okay, so I will say goodbye. I will look at some of the questions in the chat, but for now, thanks for coming, and here's what is coming up. Right, take care all. Have a nice day. Enjoy it. It's a sunny one up here. I hope it is where you guys are, or at a nice night if it's night time if you're on the other side of the world. And I will see you all again soon. And yeah, someone was asking, am I looking out the window? That is out the window. Yes. Right. Farewell all. Bye bye.